very, very difficult times. And I think your background and understanding in national counterintelligence and security, that you could give us your insights into where we are as a nation today. My first question really is that with your background and your warnings regarding domestic terrorism, could you have foreseen, actually during the first Trump administration or even during the Biden administration, that we would see an execution or an assassination of somebody like Charlie Kirk, not him specifically, but an American who was assassinated essentially, and I think some people are missing this, for his faith?
Yeah. No. Charlie had received a number of death threats. He knew that he was at risk. And I think that anyone that is as effective and as influential and as Charlie was, is going to be a target for the enemy. And so there's a lot of different ways that I could talk about this situation. First, I would say that, Charlie was a uniquely special person in that he was way better and more effective than I was or have been when dealing with the enemy in such a public way. I tend to be a little bit more hyperbolic, and I think that, Charlie was an exemplar person for dealing with some of these really dark movements within American society, really within Western society. And he was so amazingly effective because I believe, he said that every time he spoke, he would always pray that God would use his mouth. And I listened to so many of his videos, and like recently, just, since last Wednesday, I've really been paying attention to like really how he did it and how he was able to engage with people who normally you cannot even engage with. And I think that's why ultimately he was targeted for assassination by this individual, because the enemy is on the ropes, and he was so effective in confronting the evil that they had to, and I think honestly, I think that the demons are coming out, like they're making themselves public, and that, I think that this is like a spiritual sickness. This isn't just a mental sickness. This is a spiritual sickness, and it's a physical sickness. I think that it should not be lost on us that all of these mass shooters and now this assassin, that just really, I don't even know. I don't like using the word terrorism in this regard, because this was just a cold-blooded murder. It isn't terrorism. It is part of an ideology, but it doesn't mobilize the ideology, right? It really doesn't. It's not like Islamic terror. It's like that, but it's not the same thing. Specifically, it's been several years since I talked about this, but I talk about terror tactic, terror strategy, and terror policy. A terror tactic is like this situation, or say the Joker guy who shot up the movie theater, or even the kid who goes into the church and shoots up a bunch of innocent people. It's a tactic because they definitely are trying to terrorize people, but they're not really part of anything necessarily. They're just, most of them are just individuals who are nobodies, and they want to be somebody, and nobody otherwise in existence would ever even know they existed. So they do this horrific, abominable thing so that people know them, right? I mean, that's really what it is. Men lead lives of quiet desperation. And I think that these are, sick kids that are trying to make something out of their otherwise, in their mind, meaningless life. And then terror strategy is something more along the lines of the Al-Qaeda, the plane attack, where you have a group of people that all coordinate to create this big terror event to try and send a message of some kind. And that's like a coordinated thing. And then you have terror policy, which would be like the FBI raiding homes all over the United States after January 6th. That was a terror policy. That was literally done to terrorize the American people and intimidate people into silence. It's no worse than, in Iran, they go around and they beat women over the head with sticks if they don't cover their hair. That's a terror policy. That's done by the state against its people. And you won't hear very many people talk about it that way, but that's really my background is also not only in counterintelligence, but counterterrorism. And, there's terror tactics, then there's terror strategy, and then there's terror policy. And I think that while this terrorizes people, I think that, this murder of Charlie Kirk, and many people will call it terror. I think that what's crazy about the whole thing is the exact opposite of what they expected to happen. And that is that we're seeing mass conversions of people, woken Christians. We're seeing churches overflowing. Nobody burned any towns. Nobody got in any fights even. I mean, except when they're aggravated or attacked by the left, we're the good guys. We're the ones that don't want violence.
We're the white guy, and we're the peaceful.
They really want violence. They want violence because that is how they get meaning in their life, is by being the victim. And ultimately, I think, it's a tragic thing, but God has a way of doing things that are beyond our comprehension. And I'll land here on this. I would say that more people were instantaneously on their knees praying to God and praying for Charlie's survival in this in a single instant globally than at any time in human history. And there's probably been the largest conversion to Christianity in human history, instantaneously conversion to Christianity. And that is a turning point in human civilization when you have a mass multi-million movement to Christianity in an instant. The person that did this got the exact opposite of what they wanted, because now we're all going to be out there fighting the demons, and we're all going to be out confronting the demons.
You mentioned a few things here. As far as the massive response of faith and I would say even love toward, of course, Charlie and everything that he represented, everything that he worked so hard to achieve for others, self-sacrificially.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate very much to that because, I'm still not over it. The raw emotion every day.
We should never be over it.
No, agreed. But I mean, I'm still literally exhausted physically. And I keep, but I'm not trying to get out of it. I'm not trying to work through it too fast or too slow. I'm not trying to be a martyr, and say, oh, woe is me. I just mean, it's been devastating. And I think that it's odd because in some sense, when I would watch Charlie, because I did all the time, when his face was up there on my screen, I clicked because it was not going to only give me something fruitful, but it was this shining person who just, who brought hope and faith and truth and goodness and all the things that are lovely. He is a sort of an exemplar of what it means to be an American of the highest order. The one that we would say represents the ultimate goal, the wish of most American parents for their sons, just saying son right now, that they would, or he would exemplify the very character traits that Charlie Kirk had in his faith, his integrity, but also in that cheerful loving, happy attitude, because you can't underestimate the power of joy in this world and how it affects other people. And I think that that's one of the things also that contributed to the incredible hatred that the leftists have for Charlie. Because
not just Charlie. They have a. I've been posting a lot on Twitter and sharing things, and I'm basically saying, you need to remember, they don't just hate us; they want us dead. They are celebrating. They are celebrating his death, and that is them truly. And it's not all of them. I am always very careful when I say they. I'm talking about the ones that are specifically revealing themselves for the evil in their heart, right? Like these are truly evil people that are celebrating his death, maniacally laughing and dancing, and those, that is just an evil spirit. It's not. There's no other explanation. And they didn't just hate Charlie; they did it to hurt all of us. This person did it believing that he would hurt all of us, and he did. He hurt us, but he also woke a lot of sleeping people up.
I don't even believe that this shooter, this assassin, had any idea of not just the positive effects for us, for American patriots who love God, but I don't think anybody really would have understood quite the depth of love that we all had for Charlie. I saw somebody who's not even a Christian. He was on a show on YouTube, and he said, I always liked Charlie Kirk. I would watch his stuff, but I didn't know I really loved Charlie Kirk. I mean, it never would have occurred to me, but I just broke down and realized I love this man, or loved him.
I have a similar story. It's really very, very similar. And I think that there's millions of people, I think, that are feeling this way, that had no connection to Charlie whatsoever. But I have a very good friend. He's actually a relative. He's my wife's cousin. And he came home. He's been living with me for the last couple of years. And this guy's like a hard as nails kind of guy. He's like not an emotional guy. He's not a political guy. And he's a really, really fallen Christian. He's really, really angry at a lot of the things that have happened to him in his life. He's turned away from God to a great extent. And even though he pretends like he doesn't believe, I know he does. He's just kind of angry right now. But he had texted me and he said, hey, they shot Charlie Kirk. And then when he came home, he came home from work, and he came and he sat with me on the deck, and he said, I went and I saw the video. And this guy, who's hard as nails, not a Christian, he's kind of a fallen Christian, cried for the first time I've ever seen him cry. And he had no connection to any of the things. And I mean, he had seen his videos, but he wasn't like an avid follower or anything like that. He just liked how he confronted people and had a debate with them. He liked that. And so I think, and I've said this, but I haven't said it in a public way on a platform of any kind, I don't think yet. And that is that I view Charlie Kirk as a modern day apostle. And, he was brutally murdered just like the other apostles were. And so it's strange, because once I started realizing the way that God was going to use this, I've had a strange peace in my heart, because I know that whatever the devil intended, whatever the enemy intended, has completely and utterly backfired on him. And, it is a revival on a scale we have never seen. It is a global, instantaneous revival that is occurring because of this young 31-year-old father of two being brutally murdered on international TV, basically. And so my son came to me and he said, "Why, Dad? Why, Dad? Why?" And he's not a huge follower of Charlie, but he's a believer, and he knew Charlie. He said, why would God do that? And I said, you can't question why. You've got to look at the consequences of the thing. You've got to look at the outcome, because that's where you find God's work. It's in the after effects of something, whatever it may be, a good thing or a bad thing. Whatever that thing may be, you need to look at what the outcome of. Charlie is, this is all the fruit of Charlie Kirk. And, God knows what he's doing better than we do. And I don't think anybody could have done what Charlie did in death. I just don't. I mean, I'm not comparing him to Christ. What I'm saying is that.
Oh, I think I was, because we are called to be Christ-like. And if you read the Sermon on the Mount, and I was going to do, maybe I will today, a short video on this about Charlie. When you read the Beatitudes, what you say is, there's Charlie. There's Charlie. There's Charlie. Blessed are you who suffer and are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are the peacemakers, because he was a peacemaker.
He was a peacemaker.
No matter what the left's horrible propaganda is, he was a peacemaker. It's interesting to think about evangelists. Most Christians have evangelized. I used to go out on the street and actually, even if I was traveling to another city, I remember one time in Ohio, meeting up with a bunch of teachers, not meeting up, but giving out with one of my daughters, my youngest, pamphlets, tracts. And they were there on a teachers convention, which I didn't know. And they were turned on me like demons. And these are these moms that that they all look like they're going to go home and make cookies, right, for their kids, chocolate chip cookies. And they were just terrifying. I laughed. I mean, when I say terrified, I wasn't really scared, but they were scary looking. Right. And and so what I'm saying is that we all evangelize. And Charlie, what he was doing, the byproduct of it, with his method of apologetics and political discussions and discussing sin and worldview and right thinking and truth and justice and love and goodness, he was evangelizing. He was giving the gospel message, even when in the sentences or paragraphs that didn't have the word God in it, it was still the gospel message. But when you think about it, if you were going to say somebody has an account on, this is how many people Elizabeth facilitated or brought to the Lord God, of course, doing the work. I don't know. I don't know the fruit of my work. But Charlie Kirk, everybody since his death, because he died a martyr, not like a Muslim martyr, but desiring to kill others, but a martyr who was out there preaching the truth. He is literally responsible, besides probably the hundreds of thousands that maybe came to the Lord during his lifetime, for potentially millions, because there's always the domino effect. You don't know who you evangelize, that they may be the next, let's say, Billy Graham or Charlie Kirk. So what a life. Well, let me go back to the demon part. You've mentioned it a couple of times, and I've been meditating on this, that all the words that we're using to accurately describe the mindset of these leftists, the lunatic or lunacy and diabolical and deranged. And I mean, you could just create a thesaurus of all those words. But to me, the one that really lands is that there's demonic activity here. There's a real spiritual component, as you said, and the demonic is there, and possession is relevant. And I would say that, for those of you who don't think about these things all the time, remember that demonic possession or influence comes from a person or group of people opening themselves up to it. No one's going to possess me. That's just in the movies that Christians are possessed. But if you open yourself up through drug use, through, egregious sin, through obsessions, there and through occult activities, there's cracks that will be exploited. And I believe that the government school system, and of course, abetted by social media, that problem, abetted by a lot of drug use. But I think the government school system that has essentially been teaching there is no right or wrong, there's no truth, it's your truth, or there's no truth at all. I think that has opened up a generation or two of American youth to demonic possession. Because how can you maniacally take joy in the death of another human being?
Well, yeah, I would even go, when we went to grade school, when we were in school, public schools, we didn't have these problems because they weren't sowing the ideology in the public school system like they are now. This malevolent ideology of self-worship, right? I mean, there was no self-worship even in our generation growing up and going to school. It wasn't like the promotion of hedonism and the promotion of things like it is today, and like the promotion of homosexuality and, the LGBTQ stuff and all those things that have really like dominated our culture for about the last probably 20 years, really becoming really, really bad. But what I would say about this whole demon thing, and it's just something I've been thinking about since Wednesday, and I hadn't really captured it, I think, when the school shooter shot up the Catholic school, and he had drawn in his journal a picture of himself looking into a mirror, and the reflection back was that of a demon. So what that picture tells us is that individual saw himself in his perception of himself. He saw himself as a demonic figure. He did not see himself as his human figure. He saw himself as a demonic figure. So he saw his spirit reflecting back at him. And then I started like really noticing a lot of these people that are in the grips of all this evil. And what do? They make themselves ugly by any human stand, with the piercings all over their face, the sharpened teeth, horns, the violetly colored non-natural colored human hair, things like that. And I'm not saying like everybody is doing that it's like a demon and everybody that's doing that. What I'm trying to say is,
I'm not saying that either. I didn't want to say that every single person with pink hair or tattoos or a foot. But yeah, I agree.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you gotta your self-image put on the outside that is like non-human or animalistic is not a chemical imbalance in your head. That's a spiritual imbalance in your soul. That you would make yourself look inhuman or animalistic or pretend to be or exercise perverse sexual activities. People don't understand that the furries movement is pretend bestiality. That's what that is. That's pretend bestiality. That's not gender dysphoria. That is
it's a hedonism. What you're seeing is it's a giving. Yeah. It's Romans 1, giving themselves over, and then God gives them over to their basest passion.
And it's very base to the point of verging on inhumanity to themselves. I mean, like, these people are caught in the grip of a very dark spirit. Whether you believe in the divine or not, and whether you believe in demons or not, you can't believe that it is normal for a human being to pretend or want to be an animal or to decorate themselves to look demonic, even if, whether you believe in those things or not, it is not normal for a person to behave this way. And it's at the very least, it's a mental imbalance, which is what Charlie tended to say. But I believe he also knew that it was a spiritual imbalance, that they had, that their spirit was contaminated with evil.
I think that this is a national emergency. I don't, this, let me put it this way. I don't believe that someone starts using social media, like myself, for instance. I'm very much committed to the Lord and a biblical faith. And I'm in the Word, in prayer, and pretty balanced in my life, work, family.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wake up and I get an X account or a Facebook or some other account. I start seeing these horrible things being said, accusations and violent things and insulting and just horrible lies. And then I become a mass shooter or I become an assassin, right? The social media, correct me, I'm just throwing this out, that I think the social media is only an amplifier. It facilitates. But we know that children today are being taught by people that we, for instance, have been seeing over the last week that are maniacal. We have doctors and nurses, somebody in the Department of the Secret Service, in the military, teachers of elementary school, special needs teachers who are just with this hysterical, terrifying look on their face, laughing and reenacting this tragedy. Those people are in our classrooms and we are handing, not me personally, but Americans are handing their children over to these strangers, which I've been saying for decades. These are strangers. When you see them in the classroom, you do not know what they're like when they get in their car and they drive home and they leave that classroom. These are strangers, and they are perverting the minds of youth. And then social media and certain kinds of websites like Reddit or whatever work on that, and they amplify, they give words, and there's a recruitment involved there. But I don't think it's the source of it. And I think a lot of people are focusing just on the social media, and they're forgetting this is not just in college. This is going down to elementary level education.
Yeah, I think that what it is that there are people out there that have ill intent. They know what they're doing, and they are using these tools. Ultimately, I said it on Friday. I had a press conference on Friday, and I said, Charlie, one of Charlie's gifts was he was a masterful user of social media. He knew how to use social media. And so there's people out there that use social media for good purposes, and there's people out there that use social media for evil purposes and for bad purposes. And so the interesting thing is that the really, really bad ones are in like the dark web, and they're like hidden, and you got to go looking for it to find it. And what that means is you're already leaning that way. You're just going for validation. One of the interesting things, and to kind of take this back to the terrorism thing, the FBI has labeled incels, involuntarily celibate incels, as a form of domestic terrorism. And I think now, I believe, and I think.
No, wait a minute. Are you saying? Let me clarify something. Are you saying that incels, the persons, are potentially domestic terrorists? Or are you saying that somehow what is causing incels, the whole thing? I remember asking somebody, what is an incel? And they started laughing. And who is the domestic terrorist?
Well, what I'm getting at is that there is a group of people who are involuntarily celibate. In other words, and it's typically young men, a lot of young men that have autism, and it's global, and they hate women, and because they can't basically get laid, so they hate women. and they can't have a girlfriend because they don't have any social skills, and for whatever reason, they don't have any social skills. And so they bond together in these, chat rooms in the dark web, and they sort of praise and worship all these mass shooters that have gone and murdered women, or they go to the beach and they shoot the place up, or whatever the case may be. So I guess what I'm getting at here is that these people that are vulnerable, that are looking for purpose and meaning in their life, are attracted to groups. And now what social media has allowed us to do is to find, in the old days, you might be the only incel in your little town, right? But now, even in the smallest town in America, you can be connected to incels in Russia and Ukraine and China and in New York. And, so now you think, because you're connected to all these people, that there's like a lot of you. And so they shitpost each other. That's what they call it. They basically, the guy he's like in the incel dark chat room, and they're all talking about how great it was that so-and-so got a body count of so-and-so, and he killed all these people. And they're basically kind of praising this person. And then one of the incels gets a girlfriend for like 3 days. And he breaks away and he doesn't talk to her for 3 days. And then he comes back 3 days later and he's madder than hell because the girlfriend he had broke up with him, or the girlfriend he thought he had broke up with him. And so he's like talking about he's going to go he's going to go kill some people or whatever. Well, all the other incels start saying to him things like, you won't do it. You're a coward. You won't really do it. And what that does is that motivates that individual to then go and do it, to prove that they're a person of worth to their little, small, tiny community. And so these things are really important, because I think that the trans community in particular.
That's why I wanted to get you. Let's focus on the trans community.
Is there? Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at the trans community and the obvious connection to this, to Charlie's assassination, what can you tell me about the intelligence community, the FBI, their outlook, these various agencies and agents, operatives, anyone within those agencies? How do they look at the trans community, pre-Charlie Kirk's assassination? Really, where are we today with the FBI and intelligence community? And has that changed over time before Charlie?
I don't know specifically right now what the FBI is doing, because this would be, it's technically not an intelligence issue, because it's going to be a criminal law enforcement issue to investigate these people that are conveying threats or whatever the case may be, if they may be somebody who becomes violent. So I can't remember the word that Kash Patel used recently, but they have a new name for it. And he said, I'm trying to think of the name. I'll think of the terminology they're using, but nihilistic. They're nihilistic. Basically, and I haven't heard an FBI director ever talk about this. And it used to be a really small group of people that were like nihilistic terrorists. And a nihilistic terrorist is just like, basically just, let's burn everything down, right? They're not even necessarily anarchists. They just want
destruction.
Destruction. And Cash mentioned, and I haven't watched the whole hearing, so I don't have the whole context of what he was talking about. But my gut feeling is that as we make these huge shifts back and forth in the political spectrum, it bleeds into the social fabric, and one side or the other becomes, exacerbated because they've lost power, they lost influence, or whatever. And the things that Trump is doing, which I totally and utterly support, there are really small groups of people that are dangerous because they might potentially carry out violence, because they don't like, or they don't like what he's doing with immigration, or Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is
spreads hate,
right? Yeah. So in other words, these social narratives that are out there, And I think they're really nailing it a lot with regard to, like, when I say something is demonic, I mean it's a spiritual thing. I don't mean that it's like that the person is necessarily
possessed.
Well, no. They're not necessarily like a threat to anybody. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying we got to do something about this. I'm just pointing out that their behavior is evil. It's not a normal behavior, right? It's a kind of outside the norms of society. And in my mind, that would, is demonic. But what they're talking about is, they're talking about, for the last several, or really like since Trump ran for president in 2016, they've been saying that, Trump's a Nazi, wants to be a dictator. Trump, anybody who supports him is a racist. Even black people that support him are racist. Like, it's so crazy that you almost, you can't argue against it except to say that's asinine. There's no evidence of any of it.
That there's so many things today that when I'm thinking how to formulate an argument against something, I'm often at a loss of words because it's so lunatic. And it's sort of like defending that this microphone is black. And like, where do you begin? Why do I have really?
Right. Because,
you come to a loss of words because, yeah, I guess if I could start a defense of the microphone is black, but some things are just true or false on the face of them. But
I talk about that. I talked about that recently, and Charlie did too. And it's about what is the truth, not my truth, not a truth. What is the truth? We should both be able to accept the truth of black on black crime, for example, without any discussion. It is a fact.
It's a fact.
And it's 90% of all homicides and 90% of all attempted homicides are black on black crime. Okay. Yes, the white population far outnumbers the black population. So number for number, it might be equal, but but it's not equal among their
the percentage of the population. And of course, when Charlie was talking about those things, he's talking about it like when I do, concerned. I don't want the black community or black Americans to be faced with this cultural or societal or minority
economic,
economic. I mean, it's so heart-wrenching to me. Charlie's talking about it from that perspective that, hey, this is a fact, and unless we are able to speak it openly without being called a racist and be able to have a conversation, now what can we do? We've identified this as a problem. White on white murder is not, and white on black murder is not an epidemic. Black on black is. Now let's fix it. Let's save black lives because black lives do matter.
That's right.
And so what we see today, of course, is the inversion of reality, inversion of truth, and that Charlie was being a racist when he said, if I walk onto a plane, and I look over knowing that airlines have been hiring to meet quotas, to meet racial quotas, and I see a black man or woman at in the cockpit as a pilot, I'm concerned. Not because he's black, but because the DEI policies that I know that they couldn't take the natural top 10%. They had to lower a standard in order to get a racial, a better racial mix, according to the. And he was just he never. That was not a racial. That's not a racist statement. He wasn't.
It's not factual. Just a factual observation.
Observation. Right. What he's pointing out is this is not good for anybody. It's not good for anybody.
That's right. Right.
Well,
yeah, I want to say something real quick about, because you were talking about the black community. I saw a video. This is many years ago. I saw this video of two black women were fighting each other, and there were some kids around, and they were like, the community was like cheering on the people that were taking the video were cheering on the fight. And one of the women gets the upper hand in the fight, and she knocks the other black woman down. And then a little boy, who's clearly the child of this woman who's being beaten up, goes up. He's like 4 or 5 years old, maybe. And he goes up and he punches the lady in the leg, and she just turns around and just full force, full grown adult punch, and punches that kid. And he goes flying across the side, right? I mean, and I just broke into tears. And it was my son who brought this to me. And he was like, at the time, he was about my current son that's home's age, about 14 years old. And he says, Dad, what is going on? And it broke my heart, because like you and I see that, and we are sad for the children that are having to grow up in these communities, and they have to, the children don't have a choice. They are victims of all these things. Well, what are they a victim of? Well, they're a victim of fatherlessness. They're a victim of drug addiction. They're a victim of government dependency. I believe they've been robbed of I believe that the Democrat Party has basically stolen their identity. They basically have robbed them of their complete self-esteem, and they have
some dignity, their self-worth.
Dignity, their self-worth. They've robbed them of everything, and they've made them utterly dependent on the state. And then they put their kids in state-funded schools. And so these things are, and by the way, one of the things that I say, like, all of the homicide violence in the country is not 17 cities. It's 17 neighborhoods. 17 neighborhoods account for 90% of the homicides in the United States. That's 17 war zones.
We have been used to saying cities, blue cities,
correct,
right? Democrat-run cities, even when they are in red states, and the governor can't necessarily affect the governing principles.
Yeah, they can.
Mayor of that city and that city council. So we have blue cities and blue states, and blue cities and red states that are war zones. And but what you just told me, these are the kinds of things, these little nuggets of information that are, yep, I think, really clarified. And it's the light bulb moment. You're saying it's not cities, it's neighborhoods. How many did you name?
17.
17 neighborhoods in America. So would that mean that there'd be more than one neighborhood, say in California, in Illinois, in the Chicago area, predominantly?
Yeah. What I mean by neighborhoods is, it might be two neighborhoods with two different gangs that are basically fighting it out, but they are like war zones. We lose more people in these neighborhoods in Chicago than we did in Afghanistan. I mean, and here's a couple of very important elements of this. When I was looking at the numbers, it was about 10,000 homicides a year. It's more than that, I think now. I think it's closer to 14 or 15,000 homicides every year, the actual murder homicides. About 90% of those occur in 17 neighborhoods, all black on black crime, all drug gang related. 90% of all homicides occur, the total number, occur in these 17 neighborhoods. But here's the really tragic truth. And I believe finally people have started listening to me. I've been saying this for about 8 years. Because they're starting to also list the number of attempted homicides, which is 10 times that number every single weekend. So that's why we'll have like 7 people killed in Chicago in one weekend. Well, 7 times 52 is, what is that? 350 murders? Well, multiply that by 10, and you have 3,500 attempted murder every year. Every year in one city, actually, mostly just one neighborhood or a couple neighborhoods that are compressed together. And here's the crazy part. Here's the really, really sad part. Nobody talks about that. Only about 50% of them are ever even solved. Year after year. only 50% of the homicides were attempted homicides.
So in effect, what you're looking at there is that we have an under enforcement, because if 50% of homicides are solved, that means 50% of the perpetrators, the murderers or attempted murder, are walking the streets. Now they may be successful and kill somebody the next weekend and actually become incarcerated, but nevertheless, we know that I can't keep track of the statistics, and I think our way of keeping statistics is so Swiss cheese, and you never can. We should have crime statistics that are always the same. We can all go to the same database, and California is required to report the same way as Minnesota, as Florida, and so that we can compare apples to apples, and whether they're migrants or foreign-born, and all of these things. So we don't have good statistics, but it seems to me that what you're saying is that we have a very specified criminal activity, murderous activity. It's happening in very narrowly defined geographic areas. They are not cities, they are parts of cities, and those parts are usually the Black areas where Blacks are killing Blacks.
And Latinos and poor whites. It's basically really super impoverished neighborhoods that are basically run by gang violence. They're run by gangs. The police won't even go into a lot of these neighborhoods at night. They just won't go there.
Why should you, Andrew? There is a point over which, a cop should not have to cross, and that is to know that I'm going toward my death by entering into this neighborhood, and I'm supposed to do this 5 days a week. That doesn't make any sense. No wonder the policing is tough in those areas. Well, yeah, the 17 cities or neighborhoods, do you have a list of those?
I do have it somewhere, but I would, it's the ones that you would expect. It's the blue cities and red states. It's, New Orleans, St. Louis, East St. Louis, Chicago, New York, LA, San Diego, Baltimore. Baltimore's like number one, Washington, D.C. One of the things that the Democrats will tend to do is they'll say murder rate per 100,000 in a state, right? So when you look at California, it's like at the bottom of the list. But if you look at the raw numbers of homicides, they're in like the top 5, right? And so you got to be really careful of what data you consume, because it's done deliberately to mask. It's done deliberately to mask the violence in these blue cities, that are, and many of these cities, here's the thing that's just mind-boggling to me. They've been able to mask it so much that most of these cities have been Democrat, the mayors have been Democrat for 50 to 100 years. Some of them have never had a Republican mayor. And it's no wonder that they're poverty-stricken and,
I recently noticed, I think it was on X,